Okay, let's move on. We're going to talk LucidLink right now, which I know a lot of you people are interested in. Just curious, how many are any of you collaborating with people at long distance? Oh, good. See, there you go. Can you see them? All right. So I'm going to introduce you to our panel of experts here. Down here is David Leopold, has served as an editor, motion graphics artist, producer, post supervisor, and nearly everything in between in the media and the entertainment industry. And over the past 2 decades, he has worked with some of the biggest names in television. Now, in his current role with LucidLink, Leopold brings the remote collaboration solutions to the global creative community, which is the reason he is here. And his ultimate goal is to ensure that creatives are spending their time being creative. So, David Leopold.
Thank you.
And sitting next to me and sitting next to David is Katie Wade, and she is the U.S. head of post-production at Casual Films with 9 years of experience in editing and motion graphics and media management, and she joined Casual in 2018. As U.S. head of post, her drive for efficiency has helped simplify remote workflows and streamline the U.S. post-production process, making large-scale productions more accessible, and I bet you she uses LucidLink. So please welcome Katie Wade.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for having us here tonight. This is my first time to this meeting. It's exciting to be here, be in a room full of creatives, people who are not only creative but also technically minded, and it's just a really warm environment. So sort of in the spirit of the announcements, I will give a quick overview of my background and then we'll find out a little more about Katie. But as Michael said, I'm Dave Leopold. I spent over 20 years in New York as a post-production creative, really working in television. And so I spent 16 years at Viacom, now Paramount. I heard, Arthur, you had some similar brands. So I started with MTV, worked my way through pretty much every brand that they had until I was really helping with workflow strategy and creative solutions for the global organization. During that time, I got to do a feature documentary. I did some music programming. I did some weird stuff. I did some other weird stuff. I got the experience of doing every type of job out there, and I felt every pain point that they had. And so when I started looking for new solutions, I was always thinking of it not from an operations standpoint or a technical standpoint, but really what is the creative experience here? I would work on After Effects scripts that would just cut a few clicks out of the day of someone, save people a few seconds here, a few minutes here, and over time that would all add up. But ultimately, as was noted in my bio, really the goal is creatives should spend their time being creative. That's what you're hired to do. That's your talent. That's what you're bringing to the project. That's why they want you and not someone else. And so the idea that you might be sitting there waiting to download footage or waiting for a drive to be delivered to you, that's all time that is really just evaporated. You know, it's wasted, it's gone. And so my goal was always, how do we reclaim that time? An edit is never finished early. You just get as much done before the deadline as you can. And so what would it mean to a creative to say, you know what, you have an extra hour to work on something, an extra day. Can you imagine if someone said, hey, looks like you actually have an extra week to work on something? What would you do with that time? And I think it's when we start looking at how would we repurpose that time that we start to see ways that we can really build the quality of our creative output and really strengthen our collaboration. And, you know, I'm really excited to have Katie here to talk about what Casual is doing, because it really is about collaboration. It's about getting not just one person's creativity, but the collective creativity into an environment that can function as seamlessly and smoothly as possible. And so that was my intro. Katie, I would love for you to give a little backstory on how you found your way into this industry.
Yep.
and what your role entails right now.
Yeah, so I started my editing journey in high school. I was fortunate enough to go to a school that had a video program kind of tied into one of the classes and had clubs after school that would kind of go right along with that. So my love for editing and just video and storytelling kind of started at a very young age, and I went into college knowing exactly what I wanted. And I know that that's far-fetched for a lot of people who are kind of going to college to kind of figure out what they're looking for. But I kind of had that streamlined idea from the very beginning, and I've kind of just honed in on that ever since. I cut my teeth with commercial work, broadcast stuff, and I learned very quickly that my creative thought process was not necessarily needed in that realm. A lot of the times I was getting creative input from the director, the pre-production, the production aspect, the scripting kind of made me more of a button pusher versus like an actual creative. And so I took a step back from the commercial world and focused a little bit more on, as odd as it sounds, corporate content, because there's plenty of it to go around, and it keeps the bills paid. And there's always a lot of little creative avenues that you can kind of inject into corporate content, depending on the client. But that's kind of what Casual does. We're a global company. We have offices all over the globe. Our headquarters is in London. We have a New York office, an LA office. We just opened an office in Singapore. We have offices in Hong Kong and in Sydney, Amsterdam, and Barcelona. So we are as global as it sounds. But one thing that I think has really helped elevate me in my career and helped me be able to kind of craft this edit culture with all of the various offices that we have around the globe is having this connection to work off of the cloud. We don't have to be in the same city to be able to work collaboratively with the other post members. We're able to kind of hop onto their file space, make an edit, and then get back out and let them continue with their day, and vice versa. But yeah, that's kind of my spiel.
That's great. And so we're looking at the page right now that says Casual is officially the #1 production company. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Technically, it's in the UK. Globally, we can't claim that, but it is. It's the second year in a row that we've been kind of noted as #1 in the UK. So very excited about that.
And so I'm gonna let a short reel play just in the background, but as I do this, if you can kind of talk about the kinds of things that Casual does.
Yeah, we have a wide variety of clients. Each office has a number of teams associated with it, and each team has a specific type of client that they service. We do animation, live action, stock edits, as interesting as those may be. But we kind of run the gamut of types of work. Some of it will be internal HR content. Some of it will be docuseries about entrepreneurs and how they came to have their story told. It really just depends on the office that you're in, but we collectively try and offer like a white service production experience with our clients. A lot of our clients we work with so regularly that they kind of see us as a pseudo in bed, I would imagine, I would call it, like where we kind of step into their office. We feel like, and so sorry. We kind of work in tandem with them, and I don't know what I'm trying to say here. It's along the lines of like they see us as part of their company. They see us as their coworkers.
You're almost their internal agency.
Correct. Yeah. So we work with them so regularly that that's kind of how they see us, and we get to know our clients and what they want very easily, very quickly with that kind of process. So it helps get from concept to delivery a little bit faster.
That's great. And that's still part of the collaboration, because getting that vision for the client is a creative task. And so to get a diverse team with diverse talents to all understand what the client vision is and be able to execute that is a challenge. So it's great that you're able to do that so successfully. what we're really here to talk about is collaborating in sort of this new age, collaborating in the cloud, if you will. And before we really dive into that, I always find it interesting that there are certain events outside of our control that really have changed, disrupted, whatever you want to say, the way that we work. About 12 years ago, was it? There was a tsunami in Japan, and that wiped out all the HD tape stock. Nobody knew that that was going to happen, but that was the impetus for the entire industry, not by choice, but by brute force, had to go tapeless. We just didn't have tape stock. And so we had to take the old way that we were doing things, throw it out the window, and overnight figure out how we were going to change, because business continuity was the absolute most important thing at that point. Then a few years ago, you know where this is going.
What happened a few years ago?
I think there was a hurricane or something. But no, before the pandemic, I was actually working on a remote editing initiative to try and figure out, hey, if we had to send people home, how would they edit? And I was working on that for a couple months and, found a few things here and there. But then theory became practice. It became our reality, and we didn't have time to figure it out anymore. And so everyone across the industry was just throwing everything they could at the wall to see what would stick. Security policies kind of took a back seat to business continuity. And the most important thing was just making new content. And when we're faced with things like this, we see a lot of solutions come through. But the challenge is always, what is not going to be just a Band-Aid solution? What's going to not just plug a hole, but actually improve the process? Is there something out there? And honestly, that's when I found LucidLink. My jaw hit the floor the first time I saw it. It changed the way that I worked, the way my team worked. It was a game changer for us. And it was at that moment that I said, I need to actually go and tell more people about this. And so I joined the company from there. But when we take a look at the cloud, the cloud was sort of the answer for what we were trying to do, because there weren't other ways to really get people home and working properly, I guess, cloning drives. But what kind of problems were you facing sort of early pandemic?
Well, even before pandemic, we, I'm sure like many of you, worked with a NAS system that was very much, you had to be in office to have access to it. Each office had their own version, so you couldn't really just like log in to New York's NAS to work on their projects. If you needed to have any sort of collaboration from different offices anywhere, you had to either FedEx a drive or upload a massive. And so you were at the mercy of upload and download speeds. And then which version is the final? Who knows? Final.
Right.
But yeah, so we kind of took that. I had the servers at my house early pandemic, so just so that somebody had access to whatever raw media we needed, and I was able to load up LACs, send them out. If somebody was willing to drive to my house, who knew what I had, or like if I was contagious or anything like that. But early pandemic, that was kind of our process. That was our pain point, was working with freelancers, having multiple copies of projects and not really having any sort of solution to keep them streamlined, and having to reorganize them once the project is finished. I still have 4 LACI hard drives from different freelancers that I need to still put into our archive drives, but that's for another day. When we inevitably have time. Never happens. But so that was kind of our big pain point. And I think it was probably 2.5 years ago when my COO, who lives in Australia, was like, we heard about this company, LucidLink. I don't know if it's going to work, but they claim to work out of the cloud. I don't know what that would look like in our day-to-day on our day-to-day basis. But have a look at it. Have a look at it and see if it's something that's worthwhile. So I signed up for a trial, was working in it for a full year before I was like, okay, we'll let somebody else give it a shot. And even at one point, I'm sorry to say this, I said that you guys weren't an option, but that was the old file space.
Right.
So it's the slower one now, but it has been an extreme help with just general file management. Everything is the single source, or what is it?
A single source of truth.
Single source of truth. One file. There's no need to copy anything. You put it up there. It's automatic. You wait for the little blue arrow to finish, and then you can shut your computer down. But it's been revolutionary.
Awesome. Yeah. So it really sounds though that before the pandemic and at the beginning of the pandemic, it was really the biggest challenges were really around collaboration. It wasn't just about getting footage or media to an individual, but it was really how everyone was continually working together.
Our offices were operating very much in silos. We weren't able to tap into the global reach that we actually have. If an editor in New York has 2 days free and we need an editor, we either have to outsource that locally or we can tap into a resource that we're already paying for that time. So it was a very seamless transition.
And I would imagine also if you have a creative director in London with specific expertise that might be useful on a project that's happening in LA, you can now make that happen.
Yep. We recently had a shoot that was happening in Paris, and so we had a London producer on set and our New York executive producer on set because it was a New York team project, and so the UK producer took the footage back to the UK office and uploaded it for the US file space overnight so that the editors were working on it before the New York team even got back.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I really love to see is that, and I'll talk a little bit about the technology for anyone who's not familiar with it, but I really love to see this incredibly powerful tool. It just opens up all these new possibilities. You're putting together, designing new workflows that were never before possible. And so again, it's not just plugging a hole, filling a gap. It is transformative. It's evolutionary. It's really pushing not only you and the way that your team works forward, but ultimately the hope is that it pushes the whole industry forward. And it's about sharing these techniques and ways about about doing it that we really see the impact. Now, when you were starting to really look at the cloud, were there hesitations? What were the concerns about moving into the cloud?
With anything, I think the big concern was always just around like the abstract concept of working in the cloud. Like I think for a lot of the more veteran team members that I work with, that concept was like very much, oh yeah, we're going to work in the cloud. Like it's not real. Like it's never going to happen. But I think once they kind of got a look at the platform, it looked just like a hard drive plugged in, and it felt like there was physical media there. It kind of clicked that it was a good solution and it was a feasible solution. So I think that was the biggest thing, is getting buy-in from the people who didn't necessarily understand the benefits that it could bring to the team.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, we all had a concept of what the cloud was.
Yeah.
When we were first told about the cloud, we were kind of sold a bill of goods. And it was, hey, it's going to be this magical hard drive in the cloud. And so you're not going to need to store things on your computer. It'll all be up there. But what it ended up becoming was a repository that you need to constantly go grab something, pull it back. Like every time it's a trip, like you're going to the grocery store for one item at a time. And it all adds up and it becomes exhausting. And once you're, once you're, once you're finding that technology is getting in the way, That's a real problem for the creatives because they're not spending their time being creative. They're usually getting pretty upset about it. If it's a matter of trying to remote into something and control a mouse that's not keeping up with you, or, God forbid, a Wacom tablet, you'll lose your mind. So it's really from our perspective, it's always been about how do we make an invisible solution? Quick show of hands. Who loves worrying about where your media is stored, what drive it's on? Yeah, exactly. You don't want to have to worry about that. You just want to sit down, have everything at your fingertips and do your work. I remember when I was living in New York, we'd hear that there was a big snowstorm coming, and I would spend the whole day before the snowstorm loading up hard drives with everything that I could. I'd lug home a huge bag, probably tweak my back on the way. I'd get home. I wasted the whole day just copying media. I get home and the snowstorm comes and I'm trying to work from home, but there's 2 clips I don't have and there's no one to get them to me. There's stock libraries, there's, stock footage, music, you name it. Everything that's reusable, everything in our archives, I don't have that at my fingertips. And so it's how do we just make it all accessible, but not have to cause the user to jump through hoops. So, that sort of brings us to my what if scenarios of, what if you didn't have to wait for downloads anymore? I think when we think of the cloud, we think of things like Dropbox, Google Drive, those sorts of things where you upload a file, wait for the whole thing to go up, and then you have to wait for it all to come down. And you have your own copy. I have my own copy. Collaboration is kind of no longer happening at that moment. What if you never ran out of local storage? For any After Effects people, what if you never had to hear that god-awful sheep noise again as you're exporting? Why it's a sheep, I still don't know. Yeah, but also to have a broad team, 5, 10 people, and know that everyone is working on the same version. That counts for a lot. What if you could collaborate in real time across the globe? What if you didn't have to change anything about the way that you work? That's really the biggest for creatives is flexibility. Work the way that you're most comfortable. You've developed your skills and techniques to do it in a certain way. You don't want to now be told, well, you need to use this tool or you need to add parts to your process. You just want to sit down and work. And then my favorite, what if you could reclaim all that time and put it towards something else? How would you spend that time? I always say spell checking lower thirds because Wednesday is misspelled way too often. But so when it came to adopting this, what was the reaction from your team?
Well, from my COO, he was the one that I was the most nervous about getting him up to speed on it because he's Mr. Moneybags. If he doesn't like it, no, we're not getting it. And no matter how much I like it, if he says no, it's a no-go. I remember getting the message on Slack when I was in bed one morning because he's in Australia. I'm in the US, so he had responded the night before, whatever. But he said, "Oh yeah, it was super easy. I hopped on and I uploaded the things that I needed to do, and it was super seamless. Very, very nice. Good job." And I was big sigh of relief that it worked for him the way that it had been working for me, and it was super seamless.
Yeah, it's always a trial by fire.
Oh, yeah.
I think.
Oh yeah.
For those sorts of things.
And it takes a little bit of workflow. Mechanics, I think, when I was onboarding everybody onto it, the LucidLink team was super helpful. I had engineers. I think I had Steve. I can never pronounce
Nijelski.
Yeah.
Yep.
He helped onboard everybody. We had sessions. We had, I think, 3 different sessions because with all of the time zones, it made more sense to do separate sessions and have a handful of people sign up for them. But they walked us through exactly how to install the platform, how to set the panel settings so that it's not going to throttle your internet, and set the local cache settings. I'm sure we'll get into all of that stuff later, but that was the stuff that I loved to talk about. But just to make sure that it doesn't overload anybody's computer, that it's caching over 2 terabytes of things versus 10 gigabytes of things, and just different small things that might make sense to an editor or somebody who's technically skilled, but for the producer who barely knows how to format a hard drive, it was a little bit of a learning curve for them. But once they figured it out, it's been super seamless.
Just to make things a little more tangible, what we're talking about, if you're not familiar with LucidLink, really it's a storage collaboration platform, and those may not be words that you've heard put together before, but that's really what we're doing. We're allowing you to collaborate through your storage. The storage is the mechanism through which you're collaborating. So you end up with a single source of truth in the cloud. Now, as I was saying, with Dropbox, Google Drive, Box, you name it, traditional sort of sync and share solutions, you're putting everything up into the cloud so that people can then take it down and make their own copy. What LucidLink does is it puts everything in the cloud, and once it's there, it's already everywhere. LucidLink allows you to access, share, and collaborate on files that live in the cloud without having to download or replicate them. So that means no more download downtime, but also you're not ending up with your own copy. You're not filling up your own internal hard drive. Everything just works. You stay in sync with your team, and everyone is working from the same instance of the file. There was mention of Premiere Productions earlier. When Adobe released Productions, I thought this is great. This is a game changer. They've been trying to sort of emulate an Avid bin locking type, Nexus workflow, and this is going to be a great tool. And then the pandemic happened, and we realized immediately the one thing that Productions relies on is centralized shared storage. And if you're not on-prem, how do you do that? Well, LucidLink simply looks like a local drive. It is object storage in the cloud, but it looks, acts, and feels like a local drive. It looks that way to your operating system, Mac, Windows, or Linux. It looks that way to all of your creative applications. And most importantly, it looks that way to the creative end user. So this is what my LucidLink file space looks like. I open it up. I see it listed right here. I could go to my desktop, click down. It just looks like another volume on my computer. I'm going to open it up. Here's some videos. None of these have been downloaded to my computer. These are all just living in the cloud. But if I hit play, I can immediately start playing. I'm on Wi-Fi right now, so I don't know how good this is going to be. But yeah, here's another. And so you can jump, you can scrub, you can move around on the timeline. And the way that we do this is normally the old way of doing things, 20th century way of doing things. Object storage, one file equals one object. You have a 10 gig video file, you upload it to the cloud, it lives in the cloud as a 10 gig video file, 10 gig object. What we do is we take your file, and the first thing that we do before you upload it is we break it down to a tiny block level. So we atomize it into 256 kilobyte blocks, so very small. So that 10 gig file just became thousands of objects. Each block is individually encrypted. We have excellent security, zero knowledge encryption. We don't know what your data is. Your cloud provider doesn't know. But each block is then uploaded to the cloud over parallel connection, so it's really fast, like an accelerated transfer that you might get from like a Signian or a Spera type service. And once it's up there, if I want to try to if I add a clip to Premiere, or I just want to watch a video, let's say I'm in Premiere, I hit play. When the playhead starts moving, LucidLink is requesting just the blocks that make up the frame that I want to see, pulling it down on demand from the cloud, putting it into a local LucidLink cache on my machine, and serving it just in time to Premiere. So there's a little bit, we get a little bit of, in front of the playhead just to keep up with things, but you're only streaming the blocks that you need in that moment. So if I have an hour-long interview and I need a 5-second soundbite from the end, I don't need to download the whole thing. I just jump to the end of the clip, grab what I want, and use it. Again, as an editor, as a creative, as an end user, I shouldn't have to worry about where my media is. And so when your teams were starting to use this, were there many growing pains, or? The growing pains were really just around internet speed. A lot of our editors were working from home, obviously, during COVID. We didn't prioritize internet speeds. We now kind of supplement paychecks, or we supplement the employees' home internet speeds if you're working from home a significant amount of your days. So that growing pain is a little bit lessened, but there are features that would counteract the lag that you would see if you didn't have super fast internet constantly. And so we were using the pinning feature, which basically pre-caches clips. So if you know you're going to be working on project A tomorrow, before you log off today, go ahead and hit pin on that, and it will pre-cache all of those media files for you so that whenever you log in tomorrow morning, it runs seamlessly. So you never have that lag whenever you're needing to up and go. Yeah, the lowest common denominator, or the factor that you always need to take into account is still going to be bandwidth, yeah. But it's a math problem. You know, it doesn't matter how big a file is because we're only taking what you're asking for. So it's not the size of the file that matters, it's the bit rate. Mm-hmm. So if you are trying to play down, ProRes 422, HD, that's going to be pretty easy, even with home internet. If you're trying to play down a couple streams of raw 8K, that's going to be harder. And so what we do is LucidLink is very economical about how it reads and writes data. And so it really is always trying to do it in the most efficient way possible. And that's where we really utilize the cache. So as Katie was mentioning, this is the full interface. There's very little that you actually need to ever touch. Once you sign in, the average user, these are all the settings that you have, because we do want to just stay out of the way of things. But you'll see this local cache size. By default, it's 25 gigabytes. You can make it as big as 10 terabytes or as small as 100 megabytes, but please don't make it as small as 100 megabytes. Nope, defeats the purpose. Yeah. But so what happens is when I, in that example of hitting play in Premiere and I'm streaming the blocks on demand, those land in the cache and they stay in the cache until I need more space for incoming blocks, at which point the least frequently accessed blocks are evacuated. So that means that if I play a clip, it lands in the cache. If I go back to the beginning of that clip and play it again, I'm no longer asking for it from the cloud. I'm simply playing it from my local disk. And so that's where the pinning comes in, is that if you have terrible bandwidth, you're working out of a Starbucks on their Wi-Fi, if you're working on an airplane. Yep. I've done that before. Airplane. We have Stephen, the solutions engineer that Katie mentioned. He was doing some editing in the back of a moving car, using his cell phone as a hotspot, because the data was pinned, and this is not, when it lives in the cache, it is not another copy of your file. It is just the blocks that make up that file. So if anything changes in the cloud, just those blocks will update. So everything is always in sync, but the only thing that you need if your data is pinned, if your media is pinned, the only thing you need is a very, very small internet connection just to get the metadata syncing. So you can actually work in the back of a moving car. And I always mention that it was the back of a car and he was not driving even from the back seat. But I thought that was a pretty impressive demonstration of what you can do with this. So I'm curious, when you look at sort of how your operations have changed since adopting not just LucidLink, but new technologies, getting into the cloud, sort of bringing people together, how has your business changed? What's the impact been?
It's allowed producers to tap into casual staff versus needing to work with local talent, which is twofold because working with local talent, obviously freelancers are important. We like to keep them staffed and use them when we can. But when we are looking at the bottom line, and always we're constantly looking at where to save money in the business, it is really tapping into the people who we're already paying. And I think I'm getting away from the point, but it's really using the team that we have hired, using our staff in the best way possible, using them the most efficient way possible, so that if we have a day where we're waiting for client feedback on one edit, but an edit in New York, that editor is sick and we need somebody to hop on kind of last minute with little notice, I'm able to hop in and just kind of take over from where they were. So it has helped quite a bit in that regard.
Yeah, and one of those cool things that you never really think about until you're in that moment is if you are opening a project that was someone else's project,
Yeah.
maybe in a completely different location, you don't have to relink everything.
No.
You just open it up and work because it's a single source of truth, it is one file path.
Yep.
And so you keep your media in there, you keep your projects in there, and it makes it easy for anytime anyone needs to jump in and help out, do a quick change. We had one customer who found out that there was an error in an export, and he was already out at the bars. He had his laptop with him. He opened it up, had all the media, did a new export, and in minutes, he said, okay, it's there for you to take and deliver. Who's ever on the other end of the line, they see the updates immediately. When you upload a clip, if it's a format that supports a growing file, an MXF, an MP4, you can actually start playing the clip before it's finished uploading from the other end. You can access every block of data that has made it to the cloud. So it's really bringing everyone together and accelerating that time, not just to that first edit, but throughout the process. One of the things that I really like is what I refer to as nonlinear collaboration. And I'm curious if you've delved into this much, but the idea that we used to have processes where they shoot, it goes to edit, then it goes to audio, then color, graphics, and it was all very linear. But now we're able to work on the same things at the same time. Are you implementing?
We haven't had any instances where we've done that seamlessly. Mostly because we haven't had a need to. The stuff that we sort of work on, our colorists don't work off of the raw media particularly. So no, we haven't had any instances where we've done anything like that. But I have seen use cases where the colorist will kind of just be logged into the file space where all the media is, and once that media hits a certain folder, it populates for the colorist to just take over. No longer needing to upload raw media for them.
Yeah, and it's just they literally populate in front of your eyes.
Yep.
It's pretty cool. And something that's really nice too is that with LucidLink, we're not doing any of the transcodes. We're not changing your files. We're not transforming anything. We're simply giving you whatever you put in. And so when you're talking about colorists, you don't even usually need to pin everything because it's a different way of working. You're not playing down an entire sequence. You're jumping from one frame to another. You'll play some things down sometimes, but you're really parking on frames. So bitrate wise, band versus bandwidth, that's not usually an issue. But the advantage is because it's not a virtual desktop. You're not sending a video signal of what the picture is supposed to look like or what the audio is supposed to sound like. It means that you're actually working with your data locally, even though it technically lives in the cloud. So that means your broadcast monitors, your peripherals, if you're doing audio and you have a mixing board with flying faders, everything is responsive because it actually works. It's talking to the data itself. One of the things that I really like too is that it's not just collaboration within post-production, but this opens up more communication between production and post. So the Bear is one of our customers. They did both seasons of the show, but production in Chicago was talking to editorial in New York the entire time, and they could say, "Hey, you know what? We could use an insert on this, or before you leave this set or location, make sure you get that." And so to have that extra input as you're going, we've never had the ability to do that before. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, if you're not familiar with this, it's a 35-minute animated short. It won the Oscar in 2023 for Best Animated Short. 120 creatives in 20 different countries over the course of 2 years collaborating in real time using LucidLink. And my favorite part is it is the first remote production to win an Oscar. So first fully remote production to win an Oscar. And I have a story about Atlanta, and it kind of ties into something that you were talking about, which is season 3 of Atlanta shot in Europe, and they revolutionized dailies workflows on a global scale in a way that I had never seen before. And so they shot for the day. They sent to process their dailies at their dailies house in Europe. And because of the difference in time zone, exactly what you were saying, when their assistant editors were walking in the door in LA, everything was there.
Full day.
Full day, exactly. So not a moment of lost time. So as we sort of look towards the future, are there any trends that you want to see in how we can collaborate? Are there any pain points that are still not being met?
Most of the things, at least with corporate content, it may be different with episodic or features, but most of the boxes are ticked for corporate content when it comes to large scale production and global production. I'm an admin on my file space, so I have very different interface into what I can set for different users, and that you can see specific folders and not necessarily the entire catalog of media that you have up there has been super helpful, because we have lots of clients who have very strict security requirements for their media, and having random freelancers coming in and out is just a little bit of a security risk. We would hate for them to delete things, but yeah, most of the stuff has been pretty great for us.
Oh, and as you say, we would hate for them to delete things.
Yeah.
What if I deleted this live uploads demonstration? Do I have...
Oh,
Yes,
no.
I have permission to do that. Uh-oh. No one's ever seen someone accidentally delete something before, so glad I could do that for you. So we have a mechanism called snapshots, and it's similar to what you would think an Apple Time Machine might do. But again, we're very economical about how we read and write data. There are no extra copies made, but we retain the ability to go back to a file space at any moment in time. I'll just pick in this one, here. Here it is from, you know, an hour ago. I'm just going to restore that way. Can you imagine if you didn't have to go to IT or someone above you and say, I accidentally deleted something? If you could just restore it that way. I think I'm running into some Wi-Fi stuff here. Oh, there it goes. But the other part too is it keeps you safe from ransomware, and especially when you're doing corporate stuff with multiple, every day you're working with a different client. You're going to have a client who says, I actually like it the way that it was 2 days ago. Well, guess what? You can just go back to your snapshot and restore, and you haven't lost any work. We're really trying to see around corners as much as possible and really see the possibilities. But, we at LucidLink have been so excited to see how Casual has really been implementing LucidLink and enhancing collaboration and building, even greater creative output. The last thing that I'll say is, as far as permissions, Katie just said you can only see what you're allowed to see. The file space actually has many, many other folders here, but I am not the admin, so I am only allowed to see what I am allowed to see. If someone were to give me access, you're no longer sending files. You're not sending the media. You're simply revealing it. So it'll pop up instantly, and everything is just there. If I need to whatever on-prem storage you have, we also have a sort of a nearline archive tier on LucidLink. So if you want to bring the LucidLink experience to your archives, that's a great way of doing it, and you can mount multiple file spaces side by side. So archiving is really a click and drag operation at that point. Yeah.
Okay, we have to move along. I'm very, very sorry, but you have time to talk to Katie and David and ask them lots of questions during the break. This is the most important part of the show. Go out there, have some chips, have some cookies.
I would love to open it up to any questions, if anyone.
And could we have the hot slides up, Joe, so we can see everybody?
So every streamer studio production typically has different means of archiving. How does archiving work? When something lives in the cloud, then it's local.
Repeat the question.
Sure. So the question is, how do you do archiving when you're not working locally? Not archiving on-prem. The answer is you can still archive on-prem. You just sync it down, copy it to whatever on-prem storage you have. We also have a sort of a nearline archive tier on LucidLink. So if you want to bring the LucidLink experience to your archives, that's a great way of doing it. And you can mount multiple file spaces side by side. So archiving is really a click and drag operation at that point. Yeah.
Okay, we have to move along. I'm very, very sorry, but you have time to talk to Katie and David and ask them lots of questions during the break.